I never thought a single sentence could shatter my world so completely, but that evening proved me wrong. My father, usually a man of stern but steady demeanor, erupted like a storm I had no chance to prepare for. "You've never given this family anything," he screamed, his face red, veins bulging, and eyes wild with anger. I froze, unable to find words that could counter the torrent of judgment and rage. I had always tried to contribute in ways I thought mattered. I helped around the house, worked long hours at my job to support myself, and even saved what little I could to occasionally chip in for groceries or bills. But in my father's eyes, it was never enough. Tonight, apparently, it was worse than insufficient. It was betrayal, negligence, failure. His yelling echoed off the walls, bouncing around the living room and lodging itself deep in my chest. "Pack your things! Get out of my house!" he bellowed. My mother sat silently in the corner, her face pale, clearly used to these episodes, but helpless in stopping them. I felt a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief, but mostly an overwhelming sense of despair. I didn't argue. Words would only fuel his fury, and I knew that no reasoning could pierce the armor of rage he had built around himself. Instead, I began to pack my things quietly, my hands trembling, my mind racing with questions I had no answers to. How could someone who had raised me, loved me in certain ways, treat me like this? How could family, the people meant to support and guide us, become a source of pain and rejection? As I stuffed my clothes into a bag, my father continued his verbal assault, hurling accusations of selfishness, inadequacy, and laziness. Every word cut deep, each one a reminder of all the moments I had tried and failed to meet expectations that seemed impossible. I could feel tears threatening to fall, but I held them back, knowing that letting them show would only embolden his sense of victory. Outside, the night was cold and quiet. I stepped into the darkness with my bag slung over my shoulder, my heart heavy and my mind spinning. The street was empty, the world indifferent to my personal devastation. I walked aimlessly, unsure where to go, unsure who to turn to, feeling the sting of rejection in a place I had always considered safe. Home. As I wandered, I began to reflect on my life and the circumstances that led to this moment. I realized that living under constant criticism, impossible expectations, and emotional volatility had shaped me in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. My father's words, though cruel, highlighted a truth I had been avoiding. I had allowed my self-worth to be tied entirely to the approval of others, particularly someone incapable of giving it constructively. The realization sparked something within me, a mixture of resolve and clarity. Being kicked out was devastating, yes, but it also represented freedom. Freedom from judgment that was neither fair nor productive. Freedom to define my own worth, and freedom to pursue a life unbound by someone else's expectations. I could no longer control his anger or seek his approval. What I could control was myself, my actions, and the direction of my future. Over the next few weeks, I took small but deliberate steps to rebuild my life. I found temporary housing, sought support from friends who had always been there, and focused on my career. Each day, I worked to establish independence, financial stability, and emotional resilience. The pain of being rejected by my family didn't vanish, but I learned to channel it into motivation, into creating a life that was meaningful to me, rather than defined by someone else's standards. Eventually, I came to understand that my father's words, though harsh and unfair, were not a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of his own fears, disappointments, and limitations. Understanding this allowed me to stop internalizing the anger, to stop seeing myself through the lens of his approval. I began to cultivate my own sense of value, independent of familial expectations, and in doing so, discovered a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Years later, I would look back on that night not just as a moment of rejection, but as a turning point. Being kicked out forced me to confront reality, to take responsibility for my own life, and to build resilience in the face of emotional turmoil. I learned that family can hurt deeply, but that hurt does not define us. Our response to it does. In the end, the scream, the accusations, and the expulsion became catalysts for growth. I built a life based on my own principles, values, and achievements, rather than someone else's approval. I found friends who became like family, opportunities that shaped my career, and inner strength that allowed me to thrive despite the rejection. My father's words, meant to break me, instead became the impetus for my independence, self-discovery, and empowerment. Even now, the memory of his anger lingers, but it no longer controls me. I walk through life with the understanding that while others can attempt to define or diminish us, our true worth is determined by our actions, integrity, and resilience. Being kicked out was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally write my own story without fear, guilt, or expectation.